My family has let me down during my mom's psychotic episode. I am a single mother in my early 30s, navigating the chaos of raising a 4-month-old son while carrying the crushing weight of a family crisis that has shaken me to my core. My life, which was already demanding and exhausting, has spiraled into a realm of emotional exhaustion I never imagined. Every day feels like an uphill battle, and the struggle to balance my baby's needs with my desire to care for my mother feels impossible at times. My son, my beautiful boy, has brought light into my life, but even his presence can't entirely dim the overwhelming darkness I've been wading through. There are moments when I hold him in my arms, his tiny fingers curling around mine, and I find myself fighting back tears not just from exhaustion, but from a deep ache of helplessness. I'm doing everything I can for him, trying to shield him from the storm swirling around us, but the weight of it all presses down on me, relentless and unforgiving. Recently, my mother, a woman who has always been a complicated figure in my life, had a psychotic episode that led to her hospitalization. Watching her mind unravel was heartbreaking in ways I can't fully put into words. There were warning signs, subtle shifts in her demeanor that I'd noticed over the past few months, but I had convinced myself that she would be fine. She had always been resilient, a woman who carried her struggles with an unshakable determination. But this time, something was different. Her mind betrayed her, and I was left standing on the sidelines, powerless to stop the descent. I still remember the phone call that changed everything. The nurse on the other end of the line spoke calmly, clinically, but her words hit me like a tidal wave. "Your mother has been admitted," she said. "She's experiencing severe delusions and paranoia. We're doing everything we can to stabilize her." I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the phone as if it could anchor me in the whirlwind of emotions swirling through me. Fear. Sadness. Guilt. I felt them all, crashing over me like relentless waves. My mind raced, thinking of all the ways I could have done more to prevent this. I should have called her more often. I should have visited her more. I should have paid closer attention to the signs. The guilt clung to me, heavy and suffocating, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, it lingered. Despite the heartache, I made a promise to myself. I would do everything in my power to help her through this. She might be lost in the labyrinth of her mind, but I would be her guiding light, the steady presence she needed to find her way back. My love for her runs deep, even though our relationship has been fraught with challenges. She's my mother, the woman who gave me life, and I couldn't abandon her when she needed me most. I visit her regularly, bringing her the comforts of home that the sterile hospital environment can't provide. Clothes that smell of fresh laundry. Books that she used to enjoy reading. Toiletries to remind her of the little routines that tether us to normalcy. I sit by her bedside, holding her hand, even when she doesn't seem to recognize me. There are moments when she looks at me with a flicker of recognition, and those moments sustain me. They remind me that, somewhere beneath the fog of her illness, the mother I know is still there, waiting to emerge. Caring for her is a labor of love, but it's also incredibly draining. Every visit feels like an emotional minefield. I never know what version of my mother I'll encounter. Sometimes she's lucid and coherent, and other times, she's lost in a world of delusions. The unpredictability is exhausting. But I refuse to give up on her. I refuse to let her illness define her or our relationship. At the same time, I'm caring for my infant son, who depends on me entirely. His needs are constant, and the sleepless nights, endless feedings, and diaper changes are all-consuming. There's a rhythm to his demands that leaves little room for anything else, yet I've somehow found a way to stretch myself thin enough to care for both him and my mother. It feels like I'm constantly balancing on a tightrope, one misstep away from collapsing under the weight of it all. There are days when I feel like I'm drowning. The exhaustion seeps into every corner of my being, making even the simplest tasks feel monumental. But I keep going because I have to. There's no one else. I can't afford to fall apart. My son needs me. My mother needs me. And so, I push through the weariness, the tears, and the moments of despair. But deep down, I feel the isolation creeping in. The sense that I'm alone in this fight. My family, the people I thought I could rely on in times of crisis, has been conspicuously absent. And that absence, that lack of support, cuts deeper than any wound. Unfortunately, my family hasn't stepped up in the ways I desperately hoped they would. In moments like these, when everything feels as though it's falling apart, you expect your loved ones to show up, to be there with unwavering support, to carry some of the burden when it becomes too heavy for one person to bear. But instead of rallying together, my family unraveled at the seams, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage. The hardest blow came from my father. The day after my mother was hospitalized, when I was still reeling from the shock, barely able to process what was happening, he boarded a plane and went on vacation. A vacation. It wasn't a work obligation or an emergency trip. It was something he had planned, something that, in his mind, took precedence over his wife's crisis and his daughter's plea for support. I'll never forget the moment he told me. He stood there, suitcase in hand, his expression devoid of any real concern. "I need this trip," he said, as if that justified everything. "I've been looking forward to it for months." I stood there, stunned into silence. How could he say those words? How could he look at me, his daughter, overwhelmed with a baby in one arm and the weight of the world on her shoulders, and still choose to walk away? "Dad, Mom is in the hospital," I reminded him, my voice trembling with disbelief. "She needs us." He gave me a dismissive shrug, a gesture that spoke volumes. "She's in good hands. The doctors will take care of her." And with that, he left. I watched him walk away, the sound of the front door closing behind him echoing in my ears. The sting of abandonment burned deep, cutting through my already fragile heart. I was furious. I was heartbroken. But most of all, I was profoundly disappointed. It's one thing to be let down by strangers or acquaintances, but when your own father, someone who should be a pillar of strength in times of crisis, chooses himself over his family, it shatters something inside you. I thought, perhaps naively, that I could count on my brother and aunt. When my mom was first hospitalized, they both assured me they would help. My brother, in particular, promised to step up. "Whatever you need," he had said over the phone. "I've got your back." I clung to those words, desperate to believe them. But as the days went on, their offers of support became nothing more than empty promises. My brother lives out of town, and initially, he agreed to come visit. I thought that maybe, just maybe, having him here would provide some relief. I imagined he'd stay at my house, help with my baby, and give me a chance to visit Mom without having to worry about my son's care. But as the date of his visit approached, his tone changed. "I'm not staying at your place," he informed me flatly. "I'll get a hotel." I tried to reason with him. "It would be easier if you stayed here. That way, I can go see Mom without dragging the baby along." But he wouldn't budge. "I'm not staying under your roof," he repeated, his voice laced with stubbornness. There was no room for negotiation. His refusal struck a nerve. It wasn't just about convenience, it was about trust, or rather, the lack of it. My brother and I have a complicated history. He was abusive when we were younger, physically, emotionally, verbally. There were times when he lashed out in anger, his fists leaving bruises that lingered long after the pain faded. Even now, the memory of those attacks fills me with unease. I don't feel safe around him. The idea of him being in my home, around my child, makes my skin crawl. But the alternative, having him in town yet refusing to help with my son, leaves me stuck in an impossible situation. Without someone to care for my baby, I can't visit my mom. And knowing that my brother is here, yet deliberately making things harder for me, only amplifies my sense of isolation. To make matters worse, he and my aunt have formed a tight-knit alliance, one that excludes me. They've been in contact with my mom, calling her, visiting her, but they've kept me in the dark about their interactions. It's as though they've decided that I'm not worthy of being part of this inner circle, despite the fact that I've been the one shouldering the bulk of the responsibility. I've tried to keep them updated. I've sent texts, made calls, shared everything I know about Mom's condition. I've opened the door to communication, hoping they would reciprocate. But the silence on their end is deafening. It feels intentional, like a calculated move to keep me out of the loop. And that exclusion stings more than I care to admit. Every time I learn about one of their visits from someone else, a nurse mentioning that my brother stopped by, or my mom casually mentioning a call from my aunt, it feels like a slap in the face. They're going behind my back, keeping me out of conversations that I should be part of. I'm not asking for much. I just want to be included. I want to feel like my efforts to support Mom are recognized, like I'm part of a team instead of standing alone on the sidelines. But that's not the reality I'm living in. Instead, I'm left juggling everything on my own: the relentless demands of caring for a baby, the emotional toll of visiting my mother in the hospital, and the heartache of feeling abandoned by the people who should be my support system. There are days when I don't know how I keep going. The exhaustion is bone deep, and the loneliness is suffocating. One of the few moments of relief came when a friend offered to stay with me for a few days. Her presence was a lifeline. Having someone to share the load, even briefly, made a world of difference. She helped with the baby, cooked meals, and, most importantly, offered a listening ear when I needed to vent my frustrations. But when she left, the weight of it all came crashing down again. The house felt unbearably quiet, the silence amplifying my sense of isolation. I found myself pacing the living room late at night, holding my son as he dozed off in my arms, wondering how I ended up here, stuck between my love for my mother and the betrayal of my family. I've been thinking a lot about boundaries. About what it means to step back from relationships that no longer serve you. About how to protect your own peace, even when it feels selfish. The idea of distancing myself from my brother, father, and aunt feels both liberating and terrifying. There's a part of me that craves that distance, that wants to be free from the hurt they've caused. But there's another part of me, the part that still clings to the idea of family, that struggles with the notion of cutting ties. It's not an easy decision. Family dynamics are complicated, messy, and deeply rooted in years of shared history. But I'm learning that sometimes, the best way to protect yourself is to set firm boundaries. To lower your expectations. To stop waiting for people to show up in ways they never will. Still, the process of coming to terms with that reality is painful. It's a mourning of sorts, mourning the family I thought I had, the support system I believed I could rely on. And while I've come to accept that I can't change them, the hurt lingers. I keep asking myself, am I overreacting? Am I expecting too much? Should I be more forgiving, more understanding? But every time I start to second-guess myself, I think about my son. He deserves to grow up surrounded by people who love him unconditionally, who show up when it matters. And I deserve that, too. On top of everything else, the emotional exhaustion, the endless hospital visits, and the gut-wrenching disappointment from my family, I'm juggling the demands of raising my baby with no consistent support. It feels like I'm constantly running on fumes, one bad night's sleep away from completely unraveling. My son, my sweet boy, deserves all the love and attention I can give him, but some days, I feel like I'm barely holding it together. Motherhood is beautiful, yes, but it's also relentless. It's waking up every 2 hours at night, soothing cries, changing diapers, and feeding a tiny human who relies on me for absolutely everything. It's the never-ending cycle of laundry, bottles, and rocking back and forth to lull him to sleep, even when my own body is screaming for rest. It's the ache in my arms from holding him all day, the strain in my back from bending over his crib, and the mental toll of always being on. There are no breaks, no moments to catch my breath. I wasn't prepared to do all of this alone. I hadn't expected to face motherhood without a village. But here I am, carrying the weight of it all on my shoulders, with little to no help from the people I thought I could count on. For a brief moment, I had a lifeline. A friend, one of the few people who has shown up for me during this difficult time, stayed with me for a few days. Having her here was a comfort I hadn't realized I desperately needed. She cooked meals, helped with my baby, and, perhaps most importantly, offered a listening ear when I needed to vent my frustrations and fears. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I felt seen, heard, and cared for. But all good things must come to an end, and when she left, the weight of it all came crashing down again. The silence in the house was deafening. The loneliness felt unbearable. It's one thing to know you're alone, but it's another to feel the stark contrast between having support and being left to fend for yourself again. The worst part is that my family's abandonment doesn't surprise me anymore. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's one I've been forced to accept. Their absence, their empty promises, their refusal to step up, it's become the norm. And that realization breaks my heart. I'm exhausted. Exhausted from the physical demands of motherhood. Exhausted from the emotional toll of my mom's illness. And deeply, deeply hurt by how my family has handled this situation. The people who should have been my safety net, my father, my brother, my aunt, have all let me down in ways that feel irreparable. My father is off enjoying his vacation, seemingly unbothered by the fact that his wife is hospitalized and his daughter is struggling to keep everything afloat. My brother is here in town but has refused to offer meaningful help, prioritizing his comfort and convenience over my desperate need for support. And my aunt, someone I once saw as a maternal figure in my life, has chosen to align herself with my brother, leaving me out in the cold. I've spent countless sleepless nights replaying their actions, wondering what I did to deserve this treatment. Did I expect too much from them? Did I push them away? Or have they always been this way, and I was simply blind to it? The truth is, I don't think I'm asking for much. I'm not asking for them to drop everything and move in with me. I'm not asking for grand gestures or heroic sacrifices. All I've ever wanted was for them to show up. To care. To be there when it matters most. But time and time again, they've proven that they won't. And it's left me questioning everything about my relationships with them. Lately, I've been considering stepping back from them permanently, or, at the very least, setting very low expectations for our relationship moving forward. The thought terrifies me, but it also feels like the only way to protect myself from further heartbreak. How many more times can I let them hurt me before I finally say, enough? It's a complicated decision. Cutting ties with family isn't something you do lightly. There's a part of me that still holds on to the hope that they'll change, that they'll wake up one day and realize the damage they've done. But another part of me, the part that's exhausted, hurt, and done with the emotional roller coaster, knows that hope is a dangerous thing. I can't keep living in this cycle of disappointment. I can't keep waiting for people to be someone they're not. And I can't keep sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of maintaining relationships that only bring me pain. At the same time, I'm torn. These are the people I've known my entire life. My father, who raised me. My brother, who I grew up with. My aunt, who was like a second mother to me at one point. Walking away from them feels like walking away from a part of myself. It feels like admitting defeat. But maybe it's not defeat. Maybe it's self-preservation. I've read countless articles in advice columns about toxic family dynamics, and one thing stands out: you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to protect your peace. And you have the right to walk away from relationships that no longer serve you. Still, making peace with that decision is easier said than done. There's a nagging voice in the back of my mind that whispers, what if you're overreacting? What if you're being too harsh? It's the same voice that's kept me tethered to these toxic relationships for far too long. But I'm learning to quiet that voice. I'm learning to trust my instincts. I've started imagining what my life would look like without them in it. What would it feel like to let go of the expectations, the hope, and the inevitable disappointment? What would it feel like to wake up each day without the lingering ache of their absence? It's a bittersweet thought. On one hand, it feels like freedom, a chance to reclaim my peace and focus on the people who truly care about me. On the other hand, it feels like a loss, a reminder of the family I wish I had but never will. I'm coming to terms with the fact that I may never get the support I long for from my father, brother, and aunt. And that's okay. I'm learning that I can be my own support system. I can create my own village, filled with friends, neighbors, and chosen family who uplift and empower me. My son deserves to grow up in an environment filled with love, compassion, and stability. He deserves to see his mother surrounded by people who lift her up, not tear her down. And I deserve that, too. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm focusing on the things I can control: my relationship with my mother, my bond with my son, and my own emotional well-being. The rest will fall into place in time. And if that means stepping back from toxic family members to protect my peace, then so be it. I feel stuck. It's a heavy word, stuck, but it perfectly captures the limbo I'm in. I'm trapped between my desire to help my mother to be the steady presence she needs as she navigates the darkness of her mind, and my growing realization that the people around me, the ones who should be standing by my side, are nowhere to be found. It's a suffocating feeling, like trying to climb out of quicksand, with every effort pulling me deeper into exhaustion and isolation. I love my mom. That love is unwavering, even in the face of her illness. Even when she's distant or confused. Even when I see glimpses of the woman she used to be slipping further away. My love for her is what keeps me going, what fuels my visits to the hospital and my constant updates to her doctors. It's what pushes me to pack care bags with her favorite books and toiletries, hoping that these small comforts will remind her of the life waiting for her outside those sterile walls. But my love for her doesn't erase the loneliness I feel in all of this. It doesn't make up for the nights spent crying quietly after my baby has fallen asleep, wondering how I'm going to keep going without breaking down. It doesn't lessen the sting of abandonment from my father, brother, and aunt, who have chosen their comfort over our shared responsibility to help the woman who raised us. I feel so alone in this. There's a cruel irony in feeling isolated while surrounded by people. I have friends who check in occasionally, neighbors who smile politely, even healthcare workers at the hospital who nod in recognition when they see me. But none of them are in the trenches with me. None of them truly understand the emotional toll of watching a loved one suffer from a mental illness while also trying to raise a child on your own. None of them know the pain of realizing that your family, the people who are supposed to be your anchor in times of crisis, have drifted away, leaving you to weather the storm alone. And then there's the doubt that creeps in during the quiet moments, when exhaustion blurs the lines between right and wrong, reasonable and unreasonable. Am I overreacting? Am I expecting too much from my family? Am I the problem? I find myself replaying conversations in my head, dissecting every word and tone, searching for clues that might explain why things have turned out this way. Was I too demanding? Too emotional? Too difficult to deal with? But deep down, I know the answer. It's not me. It's them. They've made their choices. My father chose his vacation. My brother chose distance and stubbornness over compassion. My aunt chose to withhold information, keeping me in the dark when I needed clarity the most. Their actions, or lack thereof, are not a reflection of my worth or my efforts. They're a reflection of their priorities, and I'm simply not one of them. Accepting that truth is painful. It's a kind of grief, mourning the family I wish I had but never will. I've been holding on to the hope that one day, they'll wake up and realize what they've done. That they'll see my struggles, recognize their absence, and come back to offer the support I've been longing for. But hope can be a double-edged sword. It can keep you going through the darkest times, but it can also keep you tethered to relationships that are more harmful than healing. I've been considering stepping back from my brother, father, and aunt permanently. Or, at the very least, setting very low expectations for them moving forward. It's a difficult decision, one that feels both empowering and heartbreaking. They are my family. Cutting ties, even partially, Feels like severing a part of myself. But what's the alternative? Continuing to chase after people who refuse to show up? Sacrificing my peace, my sanity, and my well-being for relationships that only bring pain? I've come to realize that setting boundaries isn't about punishing others. It's about protecting myself. It's about recognizing that I deserve peace. I deserve relationships that uplift me, not drain me. And most importantly, my son deserves a mother who isn't consumed by disappointment and hurt. So, how do I navigate these family dynamics when they've let me down in such significant ways? I don't have a perfect answer. But I'm learning that the first step is acknowledging my own worth. I've spent too much time bending over backward for people who wouldn't do the same for me. I've given too much of myself to relationships that take more than they give. It's time to change that. It's time to prioritize the people who do show up. My friend who stayed with me for a few days? She's my village. The kind nurse who asks how I'm holding up each time I visit the hospital? She's part of my support system. The little moments of kindness from strangers and acquaintances, they matter. They remind me that I'm not entirely alone, even if my family has chosen to step away. And as for my mother, I will continue to be there for her, because she's worth it. Because she's the one person in my family who has never intentionally hurt me. Because even in her illness, I see glimpses of the woman who raised me with love and strength. I will honor that bond, even if it means carrying the weight on my own. As for making peace with stepping away from toxic relationships, that's a process I'm still working through. It's not easy to let go of people you've known your whole life. It's not easy to accept that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But I'm learning to make peace with the idea that family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by the people who show up when it matters most. The people who hold space for you in your darkest moments. The people who make you feel seen, heard, and loved. I want to build that kind of family for my son. I want him to grow up surrounded by love, kindness, and stability. I want him to see that it's okay to set boundaries, to walk away from relationships that no longer serve you, and to prioritize your own well-being. And I want him to know that his mother, despite everything, never gave up. Not on herself, not on him, and not on the people who truly matter. So, I'll keep going. One day at a time. One step at a time. Because love, real, unconditional love, is worth the fight. And even if my family has let me down, I will never let myself down. I will be the mother, the daughter, and the person I've always needed. And that, I've come to realize, is enough.